The night of the homecoming dance was supposed to be perfect. 17-year-old Sarah Matthews had spent weeks preparing, carefully selecting a shimmering blue dress that matched her eyes, practicing her makeup routine until every detail was flawless. Her mother Maria remembers watching her daughter twirl in front of the mirror one last time before heading out the door, radiant with youthful excitement. The entire Matthews household had been buzzing with energy that day, Sarah's younger brother Jake helping her pick out earrings, while her father Tom had insisted on taking hundreds of photos, much to Sarah's embarrassed delight. She had been dating Michael Chen for 6 months, and this dance was to be their first formal event together, a milestone she had been looking forward to with the intensity only teenage romance could inspire. Maria had carefully pressed Sarah's dress the night before, the same dress she had helped her daughter select during a special shopping trip to the outlet mall 2 hours away, where they had spent an entire Saturday afternoon searching for the perfect outfit. That was the last time Maria would see her daughter alive. What happened during the drive home from Westfield High School on that October evening in 2009 remains one of the most haunting mysteries in the coastal town's history, a case that would consume a mother's life for 4 agonizing years until a chance discovery in an abandoned shed would finally begin to unravel the truth. The official police report states that Sarah left the dance around 11:30 p.m. after spending the evening laughing with friends, dancing with Michael, and posing for photos at the makeshift photo booth the student council had set up in the gym's corner. Friends later testified that she had seemed perfectly normal, perhaps a little tired, as the evening wound down, but happy and relaxed in the way teenagers are when surrounded by their peers. She had declined a ride home from Michael, whose parents had insisted he be back by midnight, and also turned down offers from her best friend Jessica and 3 other classmates. Instead, Sarah chose to walk the familiar 2-mile route to her house through the quiet suburban streets she had navigated countless times before, a decision that would haunt everyone who loved her for years to come. Surveillance footage from the corner gas station captured her image at 11:47 p.m., purchasing a bottle of water with the $20 bill her mother had pressed into her hand earlier that evening, her dress still pristine, her professionally styled updo beginning to come loose, her smile still bright, as she thanked the clerk, who would later describe her as polite and chatty. After that, Sarah Matthews simply vanished into the night, leaving behind a family desperate for answers and a community haunted by questions that seemed to have no resolution. The days following Sarah's disappearance blurred together in a nightmare of police interviews, search parties, and media coverage that gradually faded as weeks turned to months without any substantial leads. Maria Matthews refused to accept that her daughter could simply disappear without a trace. She transformed her dining room into a command center, walls covered with maps, timelines, and photographs, turning what should have been a space for family meals into a shrine of desperate hope. Every morning, Maria would wake at 5 a.m., make a pot of coffee strong enough to fuel her through another day of searching, and begin calling anyone who might have information, no matter how remote the possibility. She had compiled a database of over 300 people who had been in the area that night, from dance attendees to gas station customers to residents along Sarah's route home. Local police officers initially encouraged her involvement, appreciating her organized approach and the detailed records she maintained. But as months passed and leads dried up, some began to see her persistence as bordering on obsessive. Maria didn't care what they thought. Every day for 4 years, she would walk the same route Sarah took that night, searching for any overlooked detail, any forgotten clue that might bring her daughter home. The path had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Every crack in the sidewalk, every streetlight, every house with a view of the road memorized in excruciating detail. She knew which residents had been home that night, which had security cameras, which had dogs that might have barked if disturbed. She distributed thousands of missing person flyers, personally visiting every business within a 15-mile radius, appearing on local news programs monthly for the first year, and even hiring a private investigator when the police department's active investigation wound down after the first year. David Wu, the investigator she hired, was a former homicide detective from the state capital who specialized in cold cases. His fee of $200 an hour threatened to bankrupt the family, but Tom Matthews supported his wife's determination, taking a second job driving for a delivery service to help cover the costs. The financial strain was enormous, but Maria's determination never wavered. She attended every town council meeting, pleading with officials to keep the case active, to dedicate more resources to finding her daughter. She started a website that received over 10,000 visitors in its first month, set up a Facebook page that gathered followers from across the country, and even appeared on several true crime podcasts that had picked up the story. Some episodes brought in tips that seemed promising, but ultimately led nowhere. False sightings and unreliable witnesses who may have meant well, but only added to the family's emotional exhaustion. Other families might have moved away, started fresh somewhere without the constant reminders, but Maria couldn't bear the thought of leaving the place where Sarah might return. She maintained Sarah's bedroom exactly as it was the night she vanished, down to the homecoming flowers still displayed on the dresser, now dried and brittle, monuments to a night that should have been a celebration, but became the beginning of endless sorrow. Even the slight depression in Sarah's bed where she had sat to put on her shoes remained untouched, as if preserving that last imprint might somehow bring her daughter back. The breakthrough came on a sweltering July afternoon in 2013, when 14-year-old Tommy Chen decided to explore the abandoned farmstead on the outskirts of town with his best friend, Jake Morrison. The boys had spent that summer vacation cycling through increasingly daring adventures, from building elaborate skateboard ramps to exploring the network of storm drains that ran beneath the newer subdivisions. The weathered shed, partially hidden by overgrown vines and situated behind a long, empty farmhouse, had always been off-limits according to local kids' law, though no one could remember exactly why. Some claimed it was haunted by the ghost of a farmer who had died in a threshing machine accident in the 1940s. Others insisted it was used by drug dealers, and a few particularly imaginative children swore they had seen lights moving around inside on moonless nights. Armed with flashlights and the reckless bravery of adolescence, the boys had spent the morning psyching themselves up for the exploration, daring each other with increasingly elaborate scenarios of what they might find. They had brought backpacks full of unnecessary supplies, including rope, energy bars, a compass, and Tommy's older sister's can of pepper spray, pilfered from her purse that morning. The approach to the shed had required navigating through waist-high grass that hadn't been cut in years, dodging poison ivy and disturbing countless grasshoppers that exploded into flight with each step. The boys pried open the rusted door, which creaked with a horror movie sound effect that sent Jake into nervous giggles, and stepped inside, immediately overwhelmed by the stench of mold and decay, mixed with something neither boy could identify, but which made their stomachs turn. It was Jake who spotted them first, partially buried under a pile of rotting hay in the corner where sunlight barely penetrated the darkness. Two silver high-heeled shoes, still elegant despite 4 years of exposure to the elements, one with its strap broken, the other missing its rhinestone buckle. The boys had frozen their expensive LED flashlights, creating stark beams that illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. Tommy recognized them immediately from the missing person posters that had been fixtures around town for so long they had become part of the landscape, as familiar as the seasonal decorations that appeared in shop windows or the annual community festival banners. His hands shaking, he pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911, knowing instinctively that this discovery would shatter whatever fragile peace the community had found in the years since Sarah's disappearance. The 911 operator, Linda Cruz, had been working the same shift 4 years earlier when the first call came in reporting Sarah missing, and she recognized the significance immediately. Within 20 minutes, the first police car arrived, followed quickly by a forensics team that had been on standby for just such an eventuality. Within hours, the abandoned shed was transformed into a crime scene, yellow tape fluttering in the humid breeze as forensics teams meticulously combed through every inch of the neglected structure. The shoes were just the beginning of what would prove to be a treasure trove of evidence that had been carefully hidden, but not carefully enough. Detective Ray Morrison had been haunted by the Matthews case since he took over the investigation 18 months ago, inheriting boxes of files, witness statements, and dead-end leads from his predecessor Detective Bill Henderson, who had retired in frustration after dedicating 3 years to the case with little to show for it. Morrison was a methodical investigator known for his attention to detail and his refusal to give up on cases others had written off as unsolvable. He had grown up in a similar small town and understood the way mysteries like this could fracture a community, creating suspicion and fear that could linger for generations. The discovery of Sarah's shoes reignited something in him, a determination to finally provide answers to a family that had suffered in limbo for far too long. Morrison had been running through the case files that very morning, reviewing witness statements for the 100th time, when his radio crackled with the news that evidence had been found at the old Blackwood farmstead. His heart had started racing before his mind could fully process the information. The forensic team's preliminary findings were both encouraging and devastating. Along with the shoes, they recovered fragments of Sarah's dress caught on a nail protruding from one of the support beams, a broken cell phone that had been carefully hidden beneath floorboards in the far corner of the shed, and most significantly, traces of DNA that didn't match Sarah's or any member of her immediate family. The shed had clearly been cleaned repeatedly over the years, but whoever was responsible had missed crucial evidence in their haste or panic. Luminol testing revealed extensive blood spatter patterns that had been partially cleaned but remained detectable under specialized lighting, suggesting multiple incidents had occurred in the space over an extended period. Morrison immediately expanded the investigation, bringing in additional resources from the state police and requesting assistance from the FBI's VICAP unit, which specialized in linking violent crimes across jurisdictions. He spent the next week conducting fresh interviews with everyone who had been questioned in the original investigation, now armed with new questions and evidence that might prompt different responses or recovered memories. The property records revealed that the abandoned farm belonged to a family trust, managed by a local lawyer whose name had never appeared in any previous police reports. Vernon Blackwood III had inherited the property from his grandfather in 1987 and had been paying minimal taxes on it for decades, while claiming it was being used for agricultural purposes, though no crops had been planted there in living memory. More intriguingly, cell phone data from the night of Sarah's disappearance showed several devices pinging towers near the farmstead between midnight and 3 a.m., suggesting the location had been far from abandoned that October evening. 2 of those numbers belonged to people who had never been interviewed by police, a detail that Morrison found particularly suspicious. As Morrison delved deeper, a disturbing pattern began to emerge, connecting the farmstead to a series of similar disappearances across 3 counties, all involving young women who had vanished under suspicious circumstances in the past decade. The investigation took a dark turn when Morrison discovered that the farmstead had been used as an informal gathering place for a group of individuals with troubling connections to organized crime. What had initially appeared to be a simple, abandoned property was actually the epicenter of a network that extended far beyond the local community. Morrison's deep dive into financial records revealed a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts, all somehow connected to the Blackwood Family Trust. Bank records showed unusual cash deposits into the trust account, always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger federal reporting requirements, suggesting someone with sophisticated knowledge of financial regulations was involved. The deposits came in monthly, had been ongoing for over a decade, and amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars that couldn't be explained by any legitimate business activity. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses, painstakingly reviewed by Morrison's team, revealed vehicles coming and going from the property at odd hours, particularly on weekends when young people were known to attend parties or events. The license plates traced back to a variety of individuals, some with criminal records, others who appeared to be upstanding citizens on the surface. 3 months into the renewed investigation, Morrison had identified a disturbing connection between several missing persons cases and regular visitors to the farmstead. The DNA evidence led to a breakthrough when it matched a profile in the criminal database belonging to Marcus Rivera, a man with a history of assault charges who had been living in the area at the time of Sarah's disappearance. Rivera had worked as a construction foreman for several local projects, including the renovation of the police station's evidence storage facility, a detail that sent chills through Morrison's team when they realized what kind of access that might have provided. When officers attempted to locate Rivera for questioning, they discovered he had left town abruptly 6 months after Sarah vanished, leaving no forwarding address and cutting all ties with local contacts. His former employer, Henderson Construction, claimed he had simply failed to show up for work one day and had never contacted them again. A nationwide search located him working under an assumed name at a construction site in Arizona, where he was arrested without incident by local police who had been asked to approach with extreme caution. His identification documents were sophisticated forgeries that had held up under casual inspection for years. Under intense interrogation, Rivera initially denied any knowledge of Sarah Matthews, but when confronted with the DNA evidence and detailed information about his activities during the time period in question, his carefully constructed alibis began to crumble. His phone records from that October showed he had been in contact with 7 different individuals who had also been spotted near the farmstead on various dates, creating a communication network that Morrison's team began to map out like a spiderweb of criminal connections. His subsequent confession would prove to be far more extensive and horrifying than anyone had anticipated, implicating a network of individuals who had used the abandoned farmstead for activities that went far beyond simple trespass. Rivera's confession painted a chilling picture of a predatory operation that had been targeting vulnerable young people for years. According to his statement, which was recorded over 3 separate sessions totaling nearly 8 hours, Sarah had encountered a group of men near the farmstead while walking home from the dance, men who had been lying in wait after observing her earlier in the evening. The group had apparently been at the dance itself, not as attendees, but as predators scouting for potential victims, a revelation that horrified the community and led to a complete review of school security protocols. Rivera claimed they had followed several young women from the dance, ultimately selecting Sarah because she was walking alone and had taken a route that would bring her past the farmstead. His description of the events that followed was methodical and detached, as if he were recounting a business transaction rather than describing a violent crime. Sarah had been forced into a vehicle at a point approximately half a mile from the gas station, where she had been last seen struggling against her attackers until one of them struck her with what Rivera described as something heavy, likely the tire iron later found buried near the shed. She had been taken to the shed, where she was held against her will for several hours. Rivera claimed that while he had participated in the initial abduction, he had not been present during what he described as the final incident, suggesting that Sarah's death had been the result of actions taken by other members of the group. His attempts to minimize his role in Sarah's death were transparent, but his willingness to provide names, dates, and locations in exchange for a plea agreement led to a series of arrests that shook the community to its core. Among those implicated were individuals who had lived seemingly normal lives in town for years, including Vincent Walsh, a bank manager who had served on the school board for a decade, Coach Terry Brennan, who had led the high school football team to 3 state championships, and Derek Thompson, the son of a prominent local business owner who had appeared in Chamber of Commerce advertisements as the face of the town's young entrepreneurial spirit. Each arrest revealed another piece of a carefully hidden network that had operated in plain sight, using their positions of trust and authority to identify vulnerable targets and cover their tracks. Walsh had used his position at the bank to track financial information on families, identifying those who might be less likely to have resources to sustain extended searches for missing family members. Brennan had exploited his access to student athletes, particularly those from troubled homes who might not be missed immediately. Thompson had maintained the physical infrastructure of their operation, using his family's construction company to modify vehicles for abductions and to maintain multiple properties where victims could be held. The investigation expanded to include possible connections to unsolved disappearances dating back over a decade, with digital forensics uncovering chat logs and encrypted communications that revealed the group had been active since at least 2004, suggesting that Sarah's murder was part of a much larger pattern of predatory behavior that had gone undetected for far too long. The legal proceedings that followed were complex and emotionally exhausting for everyone involved, particularly for Maria Matthews, who attended every hearing, every bail proceeding, every preliminary evidence review. The defense attorneys attempted to discredit Rivera's testimony, arguing that a plea bargain had incentivized him to implicate innocent people in crimes they didn't commit. Lead defense attorney Jonathan Kessler brought in psychological experts who testified that Rivera exhibited signs of various personality disorders that made him an unreliable witness prone to fantasy and fabrication. However, the physical evidence was overwhelming and corroborated Rivera's account in ways that were impossible to dismiss. Beyond the DNA and items found in the shed, digital forensics had recovered deleted communications between the suspects, including text messages and encrypted communications that detailed their planning and coordination. State Police cybercrime specialist Maria Rodriguez had worked for months to retrieve data from phones, tablets, and computers seized during the arrests, uncovering a digital trail that mapped their activities going back years. Security camera footage from various locations placed multiple suspects near Sarah's route on the night she disappeared, contradicting their original statements to police. The most damning evidence came from recovered video files found on Thompson's laptop, which contained footage from inside the shed during multiple incidents, including what appeared to be the night Sarah was killed. The videos, which prosecutors had to describe to the court rather than show due to their graphic nature, provided a timeline of events that matched Rivera's confession with horrifying accuracy. Perhaps most damning were the testimonies of other young people who came forward after the arrests were announced, describing encounters with members of the group that had made them uncomfortable, parties at remote locations where something had felt wrong, invitations that had seemed off somehow. Jessica Martinez, Sarah's best friend, broke down on the stand as she recalled how Coach Brennan had offered her a ride home from several practices, which she had declined because something about his demeanor had made her uneasy. Michael Chen, Sarah's boyfriend, testified about seeing Thompson at the dance, despite Thompson having no apparent connection to the school or students. 3 other families came forward with stories of daughters who had also disappeared under suspicious circumstances, cases that had never been properly connected until now. The community began to realize that warning signs had been present for years, subtle red flags that had been dismissed or explained away, allowing the group to continue their activities unchecked. The revelations divided the town, with some residents feeling guilty for not recognizing the danger in their midst, while others were angry that trusted community figures had betrayed that trust so completely. The trial revealed a careful system of manipulation and intimidation that had kept potential witnesses silent, with some victims too traumatized to speak out, till they felt safe enough to do so in the wake of the arrests. When the verdicts were announced on a cold January morning, 14 months after Tommy and Jake's discovery in the shed, the courthouse was packed with family members, survivors, and community members who had lived in fear or denial for too long. The gallery was so crowded that overflow seating had been set up in an adjacent courtroom with a live video feed. Rivera received a life sentence without the possibility of parole after entering a guilty plea to first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping, though his cooperation had spared him the death penalty that prosecutors had initially sought. Walsh was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 30 years, having been convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of assault and kidnapping. Brennan received consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole, his position of authority over young people being cited as an aggravating factor that eliminated any chance of leniency. Thompson, despite his father's attempts to hire the state's most expensive legal team, was found guilty on all counts and received 3 consecutive life sentences, with the judge specifically noting his role in maintaining the infrastructure that enabled the group's crimes over many years. 3 other defendants were sentenced to lengthy prison terms for their involvement in the abduction and assault, though they had not been present during the actual murders. Patrick Riley, who had driven the vehicle used to abduct Sarah, received 50 years with no possibility of parole for 15. James Montgomery, who had scouted potential victims at various events throughout the region, was sentenced to 40 years. Stephen Wu, who had provided logistical support and helped clean crime scenes, received 35 years. The football coach, who had used his position to identify and groom potential victims, received 40 years, while the bank manager, who had laundered money and provided financial resources for the group's activities, was sentenced to 25 years. During impact statements, Maria Matthews addressed the court with a strength that surprised everyone, including herself. She had spent weeks preparing her remarks, working with a victim's advocate to craft words that would honor her daughter's memory while also expressing the full scope of her family's loss. She spoke not just of her loss, but of her gratitude for finally knowing the truth, for the closure that had seemed impossible for so many years. Her voice remained steady as she described the 4 years of searching, the sleepless nights, the countless false leads, and the way Sarah's absence had reshaped their family's entire universe. She thanked the community members who had never given up searching, the officers who had continued to investigate even when others had moved on, and, most poignantly, Tommy and Jake, whose curiosity and courage had finally brought answers to a question that had haunted so many for so long. She also acknowledged the other families who had lost loved ones to this group, recognizing that Sarah's was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a larger pattern of violence that had scarred the entire region. The sentences brought a measure of justice, but they couldn't restore what had been lost or undo the years of suffering that had touched countless lives. Outside the courthouse, Tom Matthews spoke briefly to the media, his first public statement since Sarah's disappearance, saying simply that while justice had been served, nothing could bring back the years they had lost, wondering what had happened to their daughter. In the months following the trial, Maria Matthews faced the difficult task of grieving anew, processing not just the loss of her daughter but the horrific details of how she had died. The community rallied around her in ways that surprised and sustained her, with neighbors taking turns checking in, bringing meals, and simply sitting with her when words felt inadequate. The local church where the Matthews family had attended services for 15 years organized a system of support that extended far beyond what Maria had expected, with different members of the congregation taking responsibility for various aspects of daily life that had become overwhelming. Jane Reeves, the church secretary, coordinated grocery shopping and prescription pickups. Bob Martinez, the head of the youth group that Sarah had been active in, handled many of the administrative details that came with being a crime victim, from insurance paperwork to victim compensation claims. The church's counseling center provided free therapy sessions for the entire family, recognizing that the trauma extended beyond Maria to include Tom, Jake, and Sarah's grandparents, who had aged visibly during the years of uncertainty. A scholarship fund was established in Sarah's name, providing assistance to local students pursuing education in criminal justice, forensic science, and victim advocacy. The initial fundraising goal of $50,000 was surpassed within 6 months, largely due to the efforts of Sarah's friends, who organized everything from car washes to talent shows to raise money. The fund provided its first scholarships the following year, awarding $5,000 each to 3 graduating seniors who had demonstrated academic excellence and a commitment to helping others. The abandoned farmstead was demolished entirely, with the land designated as a memorial park, where families could find peace rather than pain in the landscape that had held such terrible secrets. The park's design incorporated elements that honored not just Sarah, but all the victims of the criminal network, with a winding path that led to a central memorial featuring a sculpture of intertwined hands reaching skyward. Local artists contributed to the project, with students from the high school art department creating a mosaic that covered one wall of the small pavilion built near the park's entrance. Maria began speaking at conferences about missing persons cases, advocating for better resource allocation in investigations, and improved support services for families facing the unimaginable. Her first speaking engagement was at a conference in the state capital for families of missing persons, where her presentation about the importance of maintaining pressure on investigations was met with a standing ovation from an audience that understood her journey intimately. She developed materials that other families could use to organize their own searches, from template flyers to social media strategies to tips for working with law enforcement. Her testimony proved instrumental in state legislation requiring more comprehensive database sharing between jurisdictions and mandating regular reviews of cold cases to ensure they remain active investigations rather than forgotten files. The bill, unofficially known as Sarah's Law, passed unanimously in both houses of the state legislature and was signed by the governor in a ceremony that Maria attended with mixed emotions, proud that her daughter's death might prevent others, but still grappling with the loss that had made such legislation necessary. The healing process was neither linear nor complete, but Maria found purpose in helping other families navigate the terrible limbo of missing loved ones, offering both hope and practical guidance based on her own journey through darkness toward acceptance. 4 years after standing trial for his role in Sarah's death, Marcus Rivera contacted the prosecutor's office requesting a meeting with Maria Matthews. The request came through his attorney, who explained that Rivera had undergone extensive counseling during his incarceration and felt ready to provide additional details about Sarah's final hours, details he had withheld during his initial confession out of what he described as shame and fear. Against the advice of many, including both the prosecutor and the victim's advocate who had supported her through the trial, Maria agreed to see him, driven by a need to understand what had happened to her daughter during those final hours. The decision created tension within her support network, with Tom initially refusing to be involved and some family friends questioning whether reopening such wounds was wise. But Maria felt compelled to hear whatever Rivera had to say, hoping that complete knowledge, however painful, might help her find a deeper level of peace. The meeting, held in a maximum security prison interview room 4 hours from Maria's home, lasted barely 30 minutes, but provided Maria with details that helped her construct a more complete picture of Sarah's final night. Rivera described how Sarah had fought back with fierce determination, how she had remained defiant even in terrifying circumstances, how she had tried to negotiate for her own life by talking about her family, her hopes for the future, her plans to attend college and study environmental science. He recounted how Sarah had managed to break free briefly during the transfer from the vehicle to the shed, running nearly 50 yards before being recaptured, a detail that explained injuries the medical examiner had noted on her legs and feet but couldn't previously explain. Most significantly, Rivera revealed that Sarah's last words had been about wanting to go home to see her mother one more time, that she had asked her captors to please tell my mum I love her, as her strength finally failed. While the information was painful to hear, it also gave Maria a measure of comfort to know that her daughter had maintained her strength and spirit, even in unimaginable circumstances, and that her final thoughts had been of home and family. Rivera also provided additional information about the group's other crimes, details that had been deemed irrelevant to Sarah's case, but which helped law enforcement close several other outstanding missing persons cases. He spoke of at least 3 other young women who had been killed at the farmstead over the years, providing enough detail for investigators to identify 2 of them and bring closure to their families as well. The 3rd victim remained unidentified, but Rivera's description had been detailed enough to generate a composite sketch that was distributed to police departments throughout the region. She left the prison that day with a strange sense of peace, not forgiveness, but understanding that even in her darkest moment, Sarah had remained the brave, determined person Maria had raised her to be. The information also helped Maria reconstruct the timeline of that night more completely, filling in gaps that had haunted her for years about what Sarah might have experienced, what she might have been thinking, whether she had known how much she was loved as her life ended. The story of Sarah Matthews continues to resonate throughout the community and beyond, serving as both a cautionary tale about the predators that can hide in plain sight and a testament to the power of persistence in seeking truth and justice. Local schools revised their security protocols entirely, with new policies requiring 2 staff members to be present during any event where students might be scattered across a campus. The police department implemented new training programs focused on recognizing patterns in missing persons cases and coordinating more effectively with other jurisdictions from the earliest stages of an investigation. The experience also led to the formation of a regional task force dedicated to investigating crimes involving vulnerable populations, with Detective Morrison serving as one of its founding members. The task force, which includes representatives from 7 county police departments, the state police, and the FBI, has been credited with solving 12 additional cases in its first 3 years of operation. They maintain a database that cross-references not just the details of individual cases, but also the behavioral patterns of suspects, looking for connections that might not be immediately obvious when viewed from a single jurisdiction's perspective. The abandoned farmstead investigation had revealed that the criminal network had operated across state lines, taking advantage of the gaps in communication between different law enforcement agencies to avoid detection for over a decade. The task force works to close those gaps, ensuring that information about suspicious activities, missing persons, and crime scene evidence is shared rapidly and comprehensively. Today, Maria Matthews works full-time as an advocate for missing persons. Her dining room command center transformed into an office where she helps other families navigate the complex systems of law enforcement, media, and legal proceedings. She has appeared before congressional committees, sharing Sarah's story as part of efforts to secure federal funding for improved missing persons investigations. Her advocacy work has led to policy changes at both state and federal levels, including grants that allow smaller police departments to access specialized resources they might not otherwise be able to afford when dealing with complex cases. She also works with technology companies to develop better systems for distributing information about missing persons, helping to create apps and platforms that can reach more people more quickly when someone disappears. Her work extends beyond policy advocacy to direct support for families. With a 24-hour hotline she helps staff that provides immediate resources to anyone dealing with a missing loved one. She often returns to the memorial park where the farmstead once stood finding solace in the knowledge that a place of such darkness has been transformed into a space where families can remember loved ones in peace and safety. The park hosts an annual remembrance ceremony that draws hundreds of people, not just from the local community but from across the state, with families who have experienced similar losses gathering to support one another and honor all victims of violent crime. The ceremonies feature speakers who share stories of survival and recovery, performances by local musicians, and a candlelight vigil that concludes with the reading of names of all known victims. Maria often speaks at these events, her message evolving over the years from one focused solely on her own loss to one that emphasizes hope, resilience, and the importance of community in healing from unimaginable trauma. If you're watching this from somewhere that beautiful memorial exists, or if you know someone touched by an unsolved missing person case, take a moment to reach out, to offer support, to keep the conversation going. The most powerful weapon against those who prey on the innocent is a community that refuses to look away, refuses to forget, and refuses to give up on bringing people home. Like and subscribe to stay updated on similar stories. And remember that justice delayed is not justice denied when communities come together to seek truth. The bell icon ensures you'll be notified when we share more stories of resilience, investigation, and the long journey toward healing that families like the Matthews must travel one day at a time. Whether you're watching from a small town like the one where Sarah lived and died, or from a big city where anonymity can make finding the missing even more challenging, every share, every conversation, every moment of awareness contributes to a network of care that can make a difference when someone needs it most. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply remember to keep the stories alive so that the lost are never truly forgotten, and so that those who search for truth know they're not alone in their quest for answers and justice.